Well, good evening. It's time for Share in the Chair, Sunshine Cathedral's midweek program where I, Darrell Watkins, the senior minister, have the joy of interviewing other religious leaders from all over and from all kinds of traditions. We've, in the past, recent past, we've spoken with an imam, we've spoken with a rabbi, we've spoken with an angelologist, we've spoken with a Bible scholar, we've spoken with a lesbian art historian and theologian. We have really fascinating guests, and tonight is no exception. We have a Unitarian Universalist minister in the chair today. The Unitarians, think Emerson, was a Protestant denomination that did not find the Trinity to be a biblical concept because they read the Bible. And then there was another Protestant group called the Universalists, and they didn't believe that anyone could be eternally damned because they had read the Bible. And these two religious liberal groups at some point merged to become the Unitarian Universalist Association, and that denomination has grown beyond being a Protestant Christian denomination to being just so much more, to being religious liberals. And their clergy are usually known for being active in social justice issues, for being theologically very liberal, and for being very scholarly. And our guest tonight certainly fits all of those molds. And so please welcome the Reverend Gail Tafscott. She was the UU minister here in Fort Lauderdale for a while at the Unitarian Universalist parish here. She now lives in Oxford, Mississippi. So welcome home virtually, Gail.
Thank you, Darrell. Great to see you and Robert again, and have a chance to check in. I know a lot of folks in your flock. I'm not sure any of them will be watching today, but maybe they can catch up another time. So yeah, thank you for having me.
Oh, I know the people who knew you were going to be on tonight. They were looking forward to it. And yes, if they're not available right now, they can catch us in an hour or in a day, or it's out there forever. Yeah. Well, we usually have about four questions for our guests, but you have a couple of Harvard degrees and I think an American University degree. I mean, you went to all these amazing places. So I'm like, you know what? We have a real scholar. Let's just load her up.
Oh. And thank you. I always like to get special treatment.
So we may even go a minute long today because I have a bunch of questions for you. But the first one's easy. The first one, 100% you'll know, and that's just liberal. Even for like Episcopalians a lot, and certainly with New Thought things, and it seems like people find them. It's not like Methodist, where your great grandma was a Methodist, your family's still Methodist. It seems like the more liberal traditions people find rather than inherit. So I just wondered if you were born into a UU family, or if not, how did you find this path?
Well, no, I wasn't born into a UU family, but I had a father who was kind of an all-purpose free thinker, adventurer, and so he and 4 or 5 other kind of rascally Southern gentlemen in Gulfport, Mississippi, when I was a little girl, formed a group that they called a Unitarian kind of coffee clutch. I don't think they were ever affiliated with the, which at that point, Unitarian and Universalist were still 2 separate groups in those days. But they did meet at this coffee shop at a hotel and kind of have liberal conversations about religion and things. And as a daddy's girl, I tagged along to some of these. So I was always aware that at least there was a group called the Unitarians. So that was childhood. And then in high school, I had a crush on a cute guy who turned out to be a Unitarian. And of course, that made me curious, and I pursued further. So I've always had an interest. I didn't actually get involved with the institutional group that by that time was Unitarian Universalist until I was in my 30s, I guess. And I was going to an Episcopal church in Washington, D.C., and the priest there sort of diagnosed me as a transcendentalist. He kind of heard me. He knew I was reading, both Christian, spiritual literature and other things. And he said, well, Gail, I think the Episcopal Church is about 50 years away from ordaining somebody like you. So I think you ought to explore the Unitarian Universalist because I think you're a transcendentalist. So of course I had read a little Emerson and Thoreau in the past. And I said, I read a little more and I said, yeah, that's exactly what I am. So that's kind of the story on that. And
The
it's a good fit, basically.
yeah. You so you found it. I love that when people refer
Yeah,
you out.
I was
Instead of,
diagnosed, is how I say. I wasn't even referred. I was diagnosed as already being one and just hadn't figured it out yet, like it was an illness or something.
that happened a lot in seminary. I noticed at Union Theological Seminary, Lutherans would become UCC.
Yes,
UCC would become Unitarian Universalist.
that's,
Um,
there's a lot of that goes on at seminary.
Presbyterians would usually just become atheists. But there was always a move sort of to the left.
I think somewhere in the first semester at seminary, something happens to a majority of people. Yeah.
Yes. Well, I have always been, and I think your congregations are probably pretty good about this too. I've always been very deliberate and being honest and telling people, like I didn't go to seminary and waist deep in debt to keep all these secrets. Mm-hmm. So if I know it, I want everyone else to know it. But I think that is not common. And so people go to seminary and they find out that what they thought was, the way things are, it just feels snatched from them. In fact, one time I was accused of taking candy from children, rolling it in the dirt, and giving it back to them.
Well, that's really because Harvard was a completely ecumenical. Everybody was there. Jewish people as non-Christian, mm-hmm. and Muslims, and so the first semester for some people that came in, as they did come from more fundamentalist traditions, it was just terrifying for a lot of them. Mm-hmm. A few made it, and a few didn't, but every single one that I ever talked to planned to go back if they're going to be a parish minister and not rock the boat. So I love what you said, that if you knew what you wanted, I would say, well, how can you do now? Episcopalians, maybe United Church of Christ, Disciples of Christ, they would probably go back and try to sort of, enlighten their groups. But many of them, they knew better, but they weren't going to teach better. And I've always mm-hmm. found that profoundly disturbing.
Yes, yes. Well, and I've known people that have done that. They were in classes with me. They know everything I know, but they went back
and and I'm not even sure that they didn't believe what we learned. I think they right. didn't think it would help their career,
Yeah, made a choice. And and there's this one guy, he posts stuff on Facebook all the time. It's like, you paid the same amount of money I paid to get the same education I paid. You could have just, grabbed a few free brochures, in somebody's lobby.
3 years at Bible college, right? I mean, you didn't need to do 3 years in a CPE and all that.
Yeah. Well, you worked way too hard just to keep secrets now, but whatever. He's happy, whatever. So, so it's a God thing. And so that's my next question, because, if I ask a Roman Catholic, who is God, what is God? Well, they flip through the catechism and they have an answer. Yeah. Even an Episcopalian, they might be more open with what they as an individual would say, but if they got stuck, they could flip back to the Articles of Faith in the back of the Book of Common Prayer and have an answer. Right. There's no such resource that I'm aware of in the UUA, and so you have to sort of share your experience. Yeah. And so my question for you is, who is God for you? If there is a God for you, because I realize that in the UUA you don't have to have one.
No, I think you need to ask that question. I think for me, God as a noun doesn't work out real well, because I don't really think of the old man in the sky or with a long beard. Although in many ways I love that imagery, and I happen to have a wonderful grandfather. So somebody once accused me of thinking that my grandfather was my God image. But if you don't have that kind of grandfather, that wouldn't work for you. I think a bit more as a verb, something that we kind of do create, kind of. But I will say that I do definitely, unlike some UUs who would consider themselves just solid humanist enlightenment people, I do believe there's definitely some larger energy that we are able to plug into. And I have used the word Holy Spirit, in terms of getting inspired for preaching and so on. And so I would definitely believe in something other than things I can touch, see, taste, and eat, So I'm definitely not a materialist, and so a little bit of a mystic, but so we'll get to more of that later, I think. So I just don't have a specific name for it, and I certainly don't have a noun-like name for it.
So really still a transcendentalist.
Still a transcendentalist, always a transcendentalist. Experience is my thing, yeah.
So do you so this divine something, activity or action or thought or whatever it is, oversoul. Do you
pretty good for me?
Do you plug into it? I mean, like, do you have some sort of prayer ritual as part of your spiritual life where you plug into this power?
Well, yes, I think so. I would say experience to me is the key to everything. I read William James's Variety of Religious Experience the summer I was 17, before I even went to college. And I had never really thought of religion as an experience before. I thought of it as something, like you said, you were given a list of things you believed. And the Presbyterians, which is how I grew up originally, that's what my parents really went to, despite my father's liberal leanings, had a catechism. Not quite as involved as the Catholic catechism. We actually had two different catechisms. And I can remember to this day, my favorite thing was the definition of sin, which I can recite to this minute. Sin is any one of conformity to or transgression of the law of God. Now you can imagine what that meant to a 9-year-old. Learning it, but anyway, that was the story. So I had that kind of, background, but it just never worked. So when I read that book, it was the first time I'd ever thought of religion as something you could experience. I mean, I thought nothing really happened to me at church, so I just thought it was something you had to believe. And then if you didn't believe it, well, then that was it. You were some kind of godless, heathen. And so he really changed my life. And I read that book every 3 or 4 years, whether I need to or not, because I think it was pivotal in my, even though it was 20 more years before I actually decided to go to seminary.
Mm-hmm. So. Were you, I was thinking probably the only more academically rigorous preparation for ministry than the UU minister would be to be a Presbyterian minister. And here you've got both experiences in your, the Presbyterians had to do everything at Union. They couldn't even take very many electives because they were required to do this and this and this and this and this. And I'm like, well, I would not want to be a Presbyterian minister. They worked way too hard to get there.
Well, we had a Presbyterian minister in Mississippi, even though I was here, and fundamentalism was already, of course, ripe everywhere, but our minister had gone to Princeton Theological Seminary, and it was Dr. Brown. So I didn't ever have to, my Presbyterian training was pretty evolved, all things considered. It wasn't super what they call deep dyed Presbyterianism.
Mm-hmm.
So he was pretty open. He didn't ever think that a girl should be a minister. He was horrified when I expressed that thought. And so he thought I should be a Christian education director.
Wow.
It took quite a while for me to evolve into finding a place that I could be an actual minister.
I know you were here in Fort Lauderdale. How many parishes have you served?
Well, I was 5 years in various capacities while I was getting through that. I was sort of a consulting, non-ordained person, and then I got through most of the hoops and stayed on for a few more years in Flagstaff, Arizona. Prior to that, I had been a director of religious education at a Marblehead, Massachusetts church after I'd finished seminary, but hadn't gone through all the, the CPE and internship hoops that Unitarians go through. And you're right, we do have, it's about a 5-year process to become a Unitarian, more like closer to medical school kind of thing. So we're pretty well educated. And I also have a degree in great books from St. John's College, the Santa Fe campus graduate program, a master's in liberal education. And that has actually served me well, maybe almost as better than my divinity school degree, and also my literary background as an English major. Those things have all been part of to me, things I use in ministry,
So we talked about God. Who's Jesus to you? I'm assuming you have a pretty low Christology.
Well, I think I'm sure that a Catholic or an Episcopalian would certainly call it a low Christology, but actually I'm a big Jesus fan. You can't grow up as a little Presbyterian girl in the deep South surrounded by Baptists and Methodists and Pentecostals and not be a Jesus fan. I think, for me, I've always been interested. Now, don't get this confused. I'm not in any way a practicing pagan, but I'm very fascinated by the shamanic cultures and the native, cultures. And so to me, Jesus is a shamanic figure that every religious culture has sort of the term practitioners of the sacred means a lot to me. And so I see Jesus as kind of an ultimate adept, a practitioner of the sacred, and therefore a very important figure. And I think for those who grew up with that, I think it's silly to change figures in midstream, So rather than going out and becoming a Buddhist, I love Taoism, and I'm a big fan of, we don't know if there really was a Lao Tzu, but whoever wrote the book, the Tao Te Ching. But Jesus is still a big thing in my life because that's what I grew up with, and I love the stories. And so, yeah, I'm a big Jesus fan, just not necessarily a fan of a lot of the followers that claim to be bigger fans.
Right. Do you take your information about Jesus mostly from the canon, or do you also get information from non-canonical literature?
Oh Lord, I've read all over the spectrum. I mean, I think I've read a lot of the Jesus seminar stuff. I have everything from the gospel parallel books that we all probably got in early seminary, to the Jesus, the red stuff and the stuff, whether Jesus might have said it or some imposter, to a lot of the Borg, read a lot of Crossan and Marcus Borg. And then I've read people like Father John Deere, who's a big Catholic social activist. I've read some of the stuff about progressive Christianity, not probably to the extent that you have. And I've actually dabbled a lot in kind of new thought things about Jesus and biblical thinking. So I've been a reader all my life. So I've read far and wide about Mr. Jesus. One of my friends says, our friend Jesus.
Our friend Jesus, FOJs. That's us. What about his execution? Do you need to find meaning in that? I once heard a New Testament scholar argue really very credibly that just snatching people up and torturing them was kind of not uncommon in the Roman Empire, and that people like me, religious liberals, Christian liberals, want to think that he defied empire, and because he was sort of a pain in their ass when he went to Jerusalem, which was a political center, and he acted out, and so they shut him up. And so that makes him very noble and brave in my mind. But she really argued that he could have just been standing there, wrong place, wrong time, and got snatched up, and like, oh wow, that would have so sucked if it was just random.
Well, we know there were a couple of thieves up there with him, so that didn't exactly sound like the best company. I mean, I think anybody that got on the nerves, I mean, yes, I've read a lot of the different theories. I don't know. I mean, to me, I'm going to say something really odd here. I don't know if you've ever seen or heard of the movie Jesus of Montreal.
Yes.
If you've never watched that.
Great movie.
That theology around the crucifixion and resurrection worked remarkably well for me because, it's like they found Jesus again somehow, in all kinds of situations. And but I remember the Episcopal priest who diagnosed me as a Unitarian basically said, well, we know something happened. We know somebody important appeared to disappear either through, the crucifixion story or some other nefarious means, and yet somehow he didn't disappear. So I thought that was from somebody who supposedly was a major believer, but that was a way that he could help people that were having trouble with it, think about it. But anyway, I love that movie. Everybody should see that Jesus of Montreal movie.
Absolutely. I actually saw it in seminary in a class I took called Christ in Film. And it was, it was great.
Well, and I think the Jesus Christ Superstar and Godspell especially also spoke to me a lot, as a important moment in my life. So.
Well, I had a guest a couple of months ago, and he actually did the interview in a Superman shirt, and he had a Spider-Man poster behind him, and so when I asked him about these characters, and he said that that was his Bible, that was scripture to him. These stories.
I think Star Wars is a great, that's real to me. That was a kind of early scripture, and the Joseph Campbell book, Hero with 1,000 Faces. If you think of Jesus as one of the penultimate heroes of that
Yes.
book, and he does mention that, even though it doesn't totally fit his idea. It starts to universalize the whole thing, which is why I say that it was one of the Niebers, I forget which one, Reinhold or Richard, and then I also knew their nephew was actually teaching at Harvard when I was there, Richard Reinhold Niebuhr. But one of the original Niebuhr brothers talked about the Christian story isn't the story, but it's our story. And I remember thinking that was a wonderful idea, that everybody could have their own story, but still you getting in some parts of the real story. Somebody's more advanced on the path than you are. And for us, why not stick with Jesus? You know, 'cause we
well, what is the Bible to you? Like this previous guest, he just sort of found a more contemporary canon. But what is the Bible for you? Is it?
Well, you know, I grew up with it in the South. It's huge. I mean, I think in Presbyterian Sunday school, we had these little booklets, and there were, I think I knew more about the Old Testament as a kid than I did much about Jesus, because we'd sort of year after year, we studied different prophets and different early figures. So I knew more about Moses and Abraham and, you know, some of the prophets than I did about Jesus, I think, as a kid. I think they somehow thought, I think they were smart enough to know in my particular church that a lot of stuff about Jesus was going to be a little hard to grasp, and all these sort of adventure stories, you know, were easier. But I mean, they made those figures so real that I was waiting for King David to drop over and play Monopoly anytime. You know, they made it very vivid, and I didn't honestly think of it as that far in the past. So I love the stories. I think I was on one of your Christians at Cocktails shows one day, and you were talking about people's favorite stories. I like so many of them, and I remember having a children's Bible as a kid and being fascinated. So I love those. And my favorite book of the Bible is the book of Acts, which I think nobody reads or preaches from nearly enough, because there you get all you need to know to run a church, as I'm sure you probably attest, and you hear about all the interscene conflicts. And, you know, if you read that book carefully, you could probably just skip seminary, frankly. So I still read the book of Acts as kind of a guide to how to navigate congregational and community life.
What is the sexiest story in the Bible for you? What do you think is the sexiest Bible story?
That's a hard one. That's really, I mean, the one I guess that I, you know, I think the sexy isn't the right word, but the Good Samaritan stands out in my mind for one basic story. So Peter Gomes, who used to be the main preacher at Harvard when I was there, and he was a gay man actually, and finally came out as a gay man. I was at a service.
We used to go to his teas. He would have a tea every Wednesday.
His teas too, and he was great. Had that kind of artificial English accent or whatever. Anyway, he's a great, amazing person. Anyway, I will never forget. I don't always remember every sermon I've ever heard, obviously, but he gave a sermon around the Good Samaritan one day, and this line has just stuck with me so well. He went through and he said, "Well, I must have preached on this, you know, like 500 times." And he said, "You know, sometimes I just wish that boy had never left home." And that just cracked me up. I thought that was the best line ever. I thought, yeah, we could just wish a lot of these stories had never been generated and never been told, because they're complicated. But I think that story, Henry Nouwen wrote a whole book about it and analyzed it from the point of view of every, you know, character in the story, including the fatted calf. So that one certainly stands. I like all the parables. All the parables to me, I don't think sexy is the word, but they're pithy, and they're never what you think they are, you know, and that fascinates me.
Yeah. Well, okay. The opposite of sexy, fundamentalism. That's what I want to ask you about now. Clearly, fundamentalism has had a huge, and in my view, negative impact in American politics. If people don't vote, if people stay home, if they don't vote, fundamentalists can actually decide elections, especially at the local level, but even nationally. They're very involved, and they're very vocal, and they will use their money to support things they believe in. So you got to give them that. The other side could take a lesson. Vote, spend your money wisely, let your voice be heard. But they have dominated American politics really in lots of ways for about 40 years. So that is what it is. And but what do you think the impact of fundamentalism has been on religion? I'm thinking right now of Jerry Falwell Jr., who is, he's a very sort of a fear and condemnation kind of preacher, as certainly his father was. His father his father put hate on the map, and but in the meantime, they always, it seems like they eventually get caught being human and being part of the things that they said no one should ever, be part of or whatever. There's another preacher right now. His name just went out of my head, but he's apparently he's been brought up again. Like, he had an affair and then he had to apologize to his congregation, and whoops, it's happened again. Right. And so, which is none of my business, and I don't even care really. Like, if it's hurt your family, I'm sorry about that. If you have some sort of agreement where it's okay, it's certainly not my business. Right. What bothers me is all of the condemnation, all of the narrowness of religion, and then meanwhile they're sneaking around doing the things they condemn. So that's sort of given religion a black eye. I think it's made religion, even if they weren't hypocritical about it, it makes religion seem scary and mean. And then when you add the hypocrisy, it makes it seem sort of useless and silly, in my view. I'm hoping you can tell me I'm reading this wrong, and fundamentalism has not hurt people like you and me and the work we do.
Gosh, I don't know. It's a huge question. I mean, of course, now I'm living back in the belly of the beast where that's the norm. I mean, in Fort Lauderdale, we could know lots of different people. There were lots of new agey kind of things and lots of new thought churches and more, certainly Church of Christ and more liberal churches. Here there's kind of the Episcopal Church in our little group, so that's about it. I don't think there's I've not been able to find a United Church of Christ or Disciples of Christ anywhere, except maybe there's something in Jackson, I think, but the smaller towns just don't have that option. The Episcopal Church is the best you can do that's not strictly fundamentalist. So, well, couple of quick things. First, I guess I grew up, even though, as I said, our minister at the Presbyterian Church was pretty open-minded, I was certainly very exposed to fundamentalism, and pretty much everybody, took the Bible pretty much, as truth, but it was a warm and cozy kind of fundamentalism. But this hatred stuff and this extreme us-them thing, I don't remember. I mean, there was racism, of course, it was, Mississippi, but I don't remember it being fundamentally around religion. But I think that when we got religion and politics became bad bedfellows, I think that's kind of how this got started. And I think I envision a group of people in a room somewhere saying, if we really wanted to take over, we could, or something. But that sounds a little bit too conspiracy theorist crazy. But, I honestly think something like that may have happened among a few well-placed people. But it's so rampant now. And you're right. I mean, I think it has had an impact, not just on politics, which has been huge, but on religion, because I think a lot of people that are fundamentally well disposed and have had religious kind of feelings and experiences and have liked Bible stories and think Jesus sounds like a pretty cool, person to emulate, but then they hear how the Christians, fundamentalists, manifest themselves and want to get as far away from it as possible. I'm sure some people have left church in general because they just don't like it's almost like we need a different word now for those who don't follow the same Jesus. I mean, and how could you even come up with a Jesus that fits their mold is beyond my comprehension. I don't know how you can get from anything you would actually read to what they come up with. It just baffles me. So yeah, I mean, I think that, so I know a lot of Unitarians, I mean, a lot of UUs come in who are kind of recovering from fundamentalism, and sometimes it takes them a long time to make any kind of peace with their religious past. We used to have a curriculum called the Haunting Church that I've taught a few times to try to get people to see that maybe they actually did get some good things and senses of community and heard some good stories, to recover from what a lot of that's turned into. Yeah. But I have not really, actually a lot of my relatives down here are Catholic, but I know family, friends, and so forth that really are that kind of fundamentalist, and yet some of them are sort of pleasant enough people, but the ones that really practice it as a tool, I just don't know. And I think they're giving Jesus a bad name, or I don't even think Jesus plays into their worldview. That's what puzzles me about it. They talk about him all the time, but I don't think they know him very well. I think they only had a passing acquaintance if that.
Right. Well,
I think we need a new name, something new, Jesusarians or something, anything to get away from this. The way Christian has been co-opted is very disturbing. you know.
Well, the mean-spirited, exclusivist, self-aggrandizing, wrist-slapping, finger-pointing, how would that Jesus have ever become attractive or appealing to anyone?
Too much of anybody, absolutely.
Why would we still know his name 2 millennia later if he was such a jerk?
I mean, I've had trouble finding passages. I mean, they quote, you know, like on the gay issue, they'll quote Leviticus and Romans, but even there are ways to read that, you know, differently, you know. And so I don't know. I think it's a matter of people that really, let's face it, most Unitarians don't know much about. They just didn't want to be whatever they were, you know, or they didn't want to grow up in it, but they don't really learn much about how to have a new worldview, and which is one of the things I used to sort of emphasize to the distress of some of my congregants. But I think you have to build a new picture if you destroy one, or else you're just wandering, you know, in a kind of spiritual wilderness. So I don't know. I don't know how. I really have never been able to get anybody to explain to me how they see Jesus and have that worldview.
Well, okay, so we don't buy the idea that their way is the only way, and or it's even a very appealing way. Let's be the only, but
the last way for me is what I
exactly. Exactly.
But it's scary, and the dominionists, that particularly virulent brand, of which I think we have several in power now, which a lot of people don't even know about. It is kind of a subgroup within that larger fundamentalist group, and boy, they're scary because they really think nobody but Christians should have any power anywhere,
right,
in the country.
Yeah, they want religion in public schools, but not really. They don't want it. They don't want a global religion curriculum. They want to indoctrinate. They want parochial school without private school prices. That's what they want.
Capitalist Christian racist is what I think they're aiming for.
Yeah. Well, nationalism is the nursery school of racism. That I believe that.
Honestly, no, I think that's true. Us and them. Whenever you get us and them, you're going to have problems politically and religiously. If we don't see ourselves, that's why the UU concept of the interdependent web of everything, not even just people, but all life, you know, is such a powerful image for me. And one thing, what's sort of, if there's any doctrine in Unitarian Universalism, there really isn't, but that idea of the web is very important to me.
Right. Well, so if one religion isn't superior to others, if one isn't the only way, if it's not fire insurance, and I insist that it is not, and if it's not the key to the executive cosmic washroom, what good is it? What value is religion to us if it's not to get us to heaven? It's not to keep us out of hell. It's not to make us better than anyone else. It's not to grant us some wishes. Why are we religious? Well, why are people like you and I religious?
Well, you know, as I said, I get back to the concept of experience. I think that you can have a religious experience that is genuine, whether it's a sense of oneness with everything, a sense of somehow being forgiven, accepted, some, you know, connection to whether, you know, you feel like you've had some kind of personal encounter with Jesus, or you saw a shining Buddha, you know, floating through the sky when you were chanting, you know, Buddhist chants or something. But I think when you've had that, then you've got somewhere to go. Unfortunately, the easiest place to go to is to get a very fundamentalist, narrow interpretation of that experience, which is what we've just been talking about. But there are other routes for you to, you know, explore on your own and, you know, delve into other traditions. And I think, you know, scripture is one such route. Now, Karen Armstrong, who I like, she's been criticized by some scholars for being a little too much of a generalist, but I tend to be drawn to generalist. She has a new book out on kind of reclaiming scripture that is like, I was going to bring it. I don't even know if I can carry it. It's a tome. It's a doorstop, you know, but I'm so excited to delve into it because I think she's often has some really provocative ideas. And I'm a big believer. I have another couple of books, one called The World Bible and one called World Scriptures, where they take different scriptures, you know, and put them in themes and stuff, and you see how similar a lot of them are. So I'm a big believer in studying religion, learning about it, and also in following disciplines that will lead you to have experiences that you can then interpret in ways that you feel comfortable with, that resonate. And I think you can do that with multiplicity of modalities. It's almost a tree of spiritual disciplines. So I don't know if that's where you're trying to get with this, but that to me means that it's the only thing to study in some ways. To me, religion is not a branch of learning, it's the branch of learning. Everyone should learn about it, but you need to learn a lot. The Alexander Pope's, a little learning is a dangerous thing, applies very much to religion.
Yeah.
So, and my feeling is, drink deeply of it or don't even go there. Just go to church and don't think about it. You might be safer that way. So I believe once you open up that, it's quite a can of worms. I mean, it's beyond Pandora's box. It seems like to me. Somebody once said, "This way madness lies." When I was at Harvard, I said, go back. You don't want to have your world blown open.
Yes. Yes. Well, and I think that's what made Jesus so appealing and also so dangerous, is that people were changed because of their encounter with him. He opened their minds, he opened their hearts.
Onto something and they wanted it. Yes.
Yeah.
I think that's a good way of thinking about it. Yeah.
Well, you have run the gauntlet. You have survived this marathon. You have done it in good time and in good humor. But there's one more. There's one more question. And this is the question that this is what we always end the discussion with. And I love the variety of answers. And I think so far they're all true. So we'll have you add to the truth here. What happens when we die?
Well, I guess sometimes I think that's the only reason a lot of people are religious, as you were, talking about in the last question. They want, as you said, the insurance about death. Well, I think, the awareness of death is clearly something it's hard to avoid, although God knows we try in modern society. We try to put it as far away as possible. I mean, that was one of the gifts of growing up in the Deep South, is people kept their dying at home. They mostly didn't die in hospitals. They didn't really have hospice. And so I grew up around people. There was somebody dying in the back bedroom at my aunt's boarding house my whole childhood. And so I didn't think it was that scary. Most of them did have pretty much of a, very traditional Christian idea that they were going to go to heaven and, meet up with Jesus. But the physical act of dying was not that scary. And I don't think a lot of people I know really had that faith. They had other people around them that had it, but most people didn't seem that scared. So I didn't really grow up with that terrifying thought. So that really wasn't a motivation for me about religion, but I think it's key to most people. I actually do not think that death is necessarily a total termination. And I guess although I've never found a definition of reincarnation that really seems to work for me, I'm inclined to think something possibly survives. I don't know. I mean, I've read Buddhist, Hindu, and even kind of more tribal ideas about, reincarnations. I've always liked the Native American idea of the spirit walk, because I think a lot of us feel that the ancestors around us, we can feel a sense of those that we've lost, that we loved. And maybe we'll be able to be that to somebody, at some other point. However, having said all that, as far as how I could define it in a realistic way that other people would believe, I have had personal experiences through, dreams. I think a lot of people have what I call visitation dreams, through weird and very strange and hard to explain rationally sort of synchronistic events that involve people that might or might not be elsewhere than on the physical plane, that I just can't deny those things happen to me. People, you can deny that I believe in a particular doctrine of scripture, or even, deny that the 7 principles of Unitarian Universalism don't mean a thing, any of that, but you can't tell me I didn't experience what I experienced. So I have a personal, pretty strong belief that death may not be physical death may not be the end of the story, but I would be unable to convince you of that unless you had had similar experiences, or at least were open to those experiences. I don't know if that's helpful to you at all, but that's the best I can come up with. And I'm always having new versions of these things happen that kind of make me think that, yeah, there's something else going on, but it may be, that Paul thing about now we see only through a glass darkly, that at some point we'll see more. But I don't really have a great fear. I have a terrible fear of the process of dying, which is why I'm staying home and not doing a damn thing, because I don't want to die on a ventilator. But the actual idea of being dead does not frighten me that much.
Right. Right. Well, I had a congregant tell me a few years ago when we were talking about it, he said, if there's something else, great, great new adventure. And if there isn't, I won't know.
Well, that's kind of how I feel, you know. I mean, I find these beliefs somewhat comforting. I don't, in a way, depend on them. You know what I'm saying? But I read some of the stuff about I think it's somebody named Mr. Moody who's done a lot of this near-death experience. I've also seen that, you know, negated by some scientific ideas about what goes on with the brain cells and so on. I'm open to this is the thing, because I don't have a system that encloses me and makes me think if I don't believe this, the whole edifice is going to crumble. And I don't think you have that kind of a system either at all. I'm open to constantly new information, you know, and so who knows, you know. I do say, as I said, Emerson, actually the Transcendentalists, which are kind of the through line of our conversation, they had a sense of some kind of reincarnation. Oddly enough, the one we don't hear about a lot and think of more as a Puritan, Hawthorne, apparently used to say that he was pretty sure he had known all those guys before, possibly even in, you know, ancient Jewish and Christian times. So all of them, they were the ones that brought the Hindu and Buddhist scriptures really to America. They brought in translations, and, you know, from the Europeans that were beginning to do some serious biblical scholarship, and other scriptures were becoming available and being translated. So they were, Emerson really loved the Hindu scriptures, the Bhagavad Gita and that sort of thing. And Thoreau sometimes referred to himself as something of a Buddhist. So they were very steeped in that idea. And I think they did have a sense that their kind of group had existed in prior lifetimes. I don't think it was equally pronounced. For some reason, Hawthorne's the one that sticks out in my mind as being convinced that he had known all of his friends in prior, you know, incarnations, we call it now. So I don't know. I guess my fundamental stance is I don't know, and neither do you, is what I would say to anybody, including the people, you know, kind of a glorious uncertainty, which I find a song that I recently heard on a folk music channel, something about the mystery. It talks about everybody's always worried about what's coming next. And I just kind of like the mystery. So that's kind of where I would end up. The great mystery.
Open to being pleasantly surprised.
Open to being surprised, but not being angry if not. Yeah. But I won't be able to be angry then, so no problem. You know?
Right. Well, this has been a delightful chat. Our time is up, but we squeezed a lot into our time. So well,
thank you for having me. And
thanks for making the time for us. And I know there's you have a lot of friends in
Unitarian Universalist minister, but then I'm retired now, so I'm no longer responsible.
Right. Well, I know that you have a lot of friends in South Florida that are going to be happy that that you had this visit with them today. So thanks again.
Thanks again for having me. Bye-bye.
All right. Bye-bye.
Everybody. Bye-bye.